Hi, my name is Karen, and this is an Introduction to English Grammar, Part 9, Subject and Verb Agreement. This is for a course given at the University of Utah. To begin with, I want you to think about these examples from our textbook. The boy saved his money. My plant is dying. It are on the table. His answers sound ridiculous. These are all violation of one principle of English grammar. Okay, can you name the principle? How would you revise those sentences? Here are some possible revisions. The boy saves his money. My plant is dying. It is on the table. His answer sounds ridiculous. Here are some more possible revisions. The boys save their money. My plants are dying. They are on the table. His answers sound ridiculous. These are all violations of subject-verb agreement in the violations that we saw. And so revising them includes either changing the verb to match the subject or changing the subject to match the verb. So our topic for this presentation is subject-verb agreement. Okay, subject-verb agreement requires that the subject and the verb match each other in person and number. Person is a term that describes whether the sentence is referring to the speaker or the listener. So either I, you, or someone who's very far away. When we talk about she, we call third person. Number means either singular or plural. Subject-verb agreement in English is less complex than in many languages. There are only two things to remember. The first thing is that third person singular marks when we use the simple present tense, as we'll see in just a minute. And there are irregular forms for be, have, and do. In English, the simple present is marked for third person singular, as in these sentences. The boy likes to eat candy. Henry struggles with math. Our teacher emphasizes the main points. Here's a chart that shows us what the subject-verb agreement looks like for the verb to be. Okay, you can see that in the first person singular, we would make it agree with I am. But in the first person plural, we would make it agree with we are. Okay, all forms of to be are irregular. Here we have the past examples. Okay, so I was, we were. Non-native speakers often have non-standard subject-verb agreement when they forget to use the third-person singular marker. So sentences like this: he go to the store every day. Sandra like chocolate. Okay? Native speakers actually make multiple errors. For native speakers, non-standard subject-verb agreement often results from the following: making the verb agree with the closest noun instead of the subject. So here's the first way that native speakers make mistakes. Here are two examples. The range of answers were interesting. The leader of bikers wear 10 gold nose rings. We also sometimes make mistakes when we don't follow the prescriptive rules about coordinated subject phrases. So in this example of a mistake, either my mother or my father have that book I wanted to lend you. We also, as native speakers, sometimes use the lexicalized theirs construction for something like, there's 3 cats in my backyard right now, where theirs is actually supposed to mean there is and not there are. But for some reason, when we put it together as theirs, we interpret that as being okay as either a singular or a plural. Okay? So for those 3 mistakes that native speakers make, all of them have to do with where the subject is and how it relates to the verb. For some of you, those 3 different types of errors might have all sounded correct to your mental grammar. And that's a normal thing to happen. But for our prescriptive rules, remember our tests are based on our prescriptive rules. For prescriptive rules, there's a prescription against these types of constructions. And here's what the rules look like. Okay, the first rule is about coordinated subjects and phrases. Okay, if the coordinator is and or both something and something else, then we act like the subject is plural. So in the sentence, my mother and her son blank to the movies every Saturday. Or both Harry and Andy blank surprised by her bold statement. We should be choosing the subject, or excuse me, we should be choosing the verb that is plural to match the plural subject here. So something like, my mother and her son go to the movies every Saturday. Both Harry and Andy were surprised by her bold statement. So that's one of the ways that we coordinate. The second rule about coordinating certain phrases has to do with either has to do with the word or, either something or something else, and neither, and then the subject, nor, and another noun phrase. The rule is that we make the verb agree with the closest part of the subject. So where and, we made it agree with the whole subject. In this case, we make it agree with just the noun phrase that is closest to the verb. So in these examples, Bill or Bob blank the sign on a regular basis, we have to make a decision whether we say Bill or Bob changes or Bill or Bob change the sign on a regular basis. For some native speakers, both of those sound okay to your mental grammar, or perhaps the prescriptively incorrect one sounds correct to your mental grammar. But based on the rules that we have, these would be the correct answers for these three sentences. Okay, the first one, Bill or Bob changes the sign on a regular basis. So we should have the verb changes agree with just Bob, as if we removed Bill from the sentence. On the second sentence, either my parents or Bill gives the dog its medicine. Okay, again, it's agreeing with the closest noun phrase, which in this case is Bill. So it needs to be a singular verb to go with the singular subject. On the third sentence, either Bill or my parents give the dog its medicine. When we switch the places of those two noun phrases in sentence 3, then my parents becomes the closest noun phrase to the verb, and so the verb must agree with my parents. So both my parents and the verb give are both plural. The following were collected from newspapers, textbooks, websites, and university student writing. What do they all have in common? The first sentence, I think teaching them these things are an important part in promoting skills they will need for the 21st century. We have the verb are there in the middle of the sentence, and the nearest noun to it is things. So sometimes our mental grammar accepts that as being correct because we have a plural noun that is near the plural verb. But in fact, it should be a singular verb agreeing with the singular subject. I think teaching, or I think teaching them, is an important part. So because of the distance between the subject and the verb, sometimes our mental grammar accepts that those sentences are okay. But prescriptive rules say that we should follow and agree with the subject, not the closest noun phrase. In the second sentence, the report concludes that a range of effective treatments exist for nearly all mental disorders. Again, we have a verb exist, which is near a plural noun, treatments, but that is not the subject of this phrase. The subject of this phrase is a range. So it should be, the report concludes that a range exists for nearly all mental disorders. Okay? It doesn't matter that inside of the subject noun phrase that we also have a prepositional or an object of a preposition that is closer to the verb. It still needs to agree with the subject. Okay? The third sentence, investors are already beginning to see signs that the impact of pre-announcements are diminishing. Again, it should be impact. Here is our verb that should agree with the verb is. So it should be impact is diminishing. Okay, even though we have, again, an object of a preposition inside of that noun phrase. So let's practice. Here are some sentences. You can go ahead and pause the video while you work these out. First, you want to tell me what kind of violation it makes, and then what leads people to make the error, and then 2, what is the correct version of each sentence. Okay, so I'm going to give you an example sentence. For number 1. So number 1, neither my mother nor my father are going. It violates the rule for coordinated phrases and subjects. Remember, neither nor had one of those special situations. It should be neither my mother nor my father is going. Okay? When you use neither nor, the verb should agree with the closest subject, my father, so it should be a singular is. Okay? Go ahead and work the rest of those out on your own. Pause the video if you need to. The summary for this presentation: subject-verb agreement means that the subject and verb are supposed to match in person and number. Both native and non-native speakers have non-standard subject-verb agreement sometimes. Prescriptive rules say that the verb agrees with the subject, not the nearest noun. Also, we have to watch out for coordinated subjects. Either or, in particular, has very special rules. And third, don't use theirs to introduce plural topics.